Our guest on this edition of Citywide is New York State Assembly Member Keith Wright of Harlem. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Ken.
Keith, 183 members of the legislature, not including you, signed the pledge that they were going to support an independent districting commission for reapportionment to do the lines this year. The governor said over and over again that he was going to veto any bill that put forth lines that didn't come from an independent commission. But when the dust settled, the Legislative Task Force on Reapportionment has drawn the lines for the Assembly and the Senate, tossed it over to the courts for the Congress. What happened?
Well, and I'm glad you did say that I did not sign the pledge. Well, it's just an old adage in politics. Nothing is done until it's done. Some people, I'm sure, signed the pledge for political expediency. Some folks probably signed the pledge because they actually believed in the pledge. However, and when the dust does settle, the governor was talking about over and over and over again that he would veto the lines. It didn't happen. What happened was that politics, government is the art of negotiation and compromise. The governor wanted some things. He wanted what he thought was pension reform. He wanted certainly a full DNA data bank, and we wanted, we being in the legislature, we wanted our lines for the state Senate and for the Assembly. So, unless you wanted to reach an impasse, unless you wanted to shut down government, things still have to move, and the governor has prided himself on being able to move government, move Albany, something that few governors have been able to do in recent modern times. And so the dust settled, and there was the people that signed the pledges, I guess the Ed Koch pledge, that's what we're referring to. Those folks will have to deal with Ed Koch, but certainly people will recognize that government did in fact move, it did in fact work. Although some people won't be happy, and some people will be very happy, but that's what happened.
For a candidate, for a legislator, the district lines are, if not the most important thing, they're certainly one of the most important things in the political calculus. But I want to ask you, over the last few months, as you traveled your district, how often did this issue come up with voters?
Not once, not once. Voters have absolutely no idea what it means in terms of the concept of reapportionment. They may have heard the word gerrymander, but not once. They have no idea. I'll tell you what they do know about. When I try to tell them what it's all about, and that I may be representing this area and I might not be representing that area, no matter what fights I've had with them over whatever issues, they say, oh, no, Keith, you better still represent us, no matter what.
Well, that's the old saying that people, they don't like the Congress, they don't like the state legislature,
That's
but
right.
they like their representatives.
They like their representatives. So, but it did not come up, I can tell you, not once. What does come up, people say, well, Keith, I need a job. Keith, I need an apartment. Keith, I need to get my daughter in this school. I mean, those bread and butter issues still prevail throughout any political scene.
One could make the observation that Andrew Cuomo's success so far with the legislature, certainly remarkable rookie year, property tax cap, gay marriage, several other things, and then this year, pension bill, gambling, DNA database. One could make the argument that to some extent it's a function of timing. He comes off of a strong election year against a weak Republican opponent. This year was a reapportionment year, which gave him unusual leverage.
Sure.
Is he a skillful politician taking advantage of circumstances, or has the climate and culture in Albany actually changed? Is it different than it had been?
He's a very strong-willed and a very strong governor. Timing has a lot to do with it. Certainly he's a person who's at the right place at the right time. What I've also noticed about the governor is that he studies. He studies the governors that have come before him. He will not make the same mistakes that those governors have made before him, including his father. I think he studies, he's a student of politics, he's a student of government, and he's a brilliant guy. But certainly what also adds to the brilliance is that he works incredibly hard. So that he knows, he really doesn't open his mouth unless he feels as if he knows what he's talking about. And I'm talking on a policy level, on a legal issue, and even on a political issue.
I have remarked to occasionally that people misread Andrew Cuomo in the sense that his political father is not Mario Cuomo, the liberal lion of the Democratic Party. His political father was Bill Clinton, who was very much in the centrist mode of the Democratic Party. And some commentators recently have sort of pushed that a little further to say that his sort of values win with gay marriage gave him a lot of credibility on the left, but he's actually governed to some extent to the right. So is Andrew Cuomo a liberal?
Listen, I don't think you could really define him as a liberal or a conservative. I would call him a pragmatist in many, many ways. Certainly he's done in his achievements over the last year and a half, or whatever it is, have been what he has felt have been practical issues. Certainly there's always been a contentious relationship between any governor and any member of the legislature, or the legislature as a body. It's always, I mean, it's just part of the system. That's the way it is. Certainly he hasn't bought into some of the contention that happened in years past, but I guess the tension has been more on a policy level, whether you agree with him or not, and certainly I have not agreed with him on everything. But certainly the door is always open to be able to talk about what you can vote for and what you agree with, and he's made some magnificent strides. I mean, as you said, but one thing he's really done is that he's really paid attention, and he's really trying to push forward the MWBE legislation, which has been very important to communities that I represent.
And this is efforts to give economic empowerment
Absolutely.
to women and
Absolutely.
minorities.
Absolutely.
And he is sort of has a reputation for being very direct with people. On the other hand, very carefully crafting their public persona. How often do you hear from him? Is he calling legislators to talk to them directly? Is it done through staff? Is he aloof? Is he engaged?
I think he's probably one of the most engaged governors that I have ever seen. If you disagree with him, you will certainly hear from him pretty quickly. But he's been very accessible. He calls me regularly. Certainly, I know that he calls other members of the legislature regularly. And he's, when you have a father like Mario Cuomo, who would sometimes just revel in the art of debate, certainly, he would just sometimes debate just for debate's sake. And Andrew has picked up some of those characteristics as well.
Now, you are not just a member of the Assembly. First, you're a senior member.
I'm getting paid like it, though.
You've been there since 1992, so considerable seniority. You chair the Labor Committee, which is a very important committee in Albany. And you also are the county leader, the head of the Democratic Party of the County of New York.
Manhattan, yeah.
What does that do?
The county leader?
Yeah, what do you do as the county leader?
Well, certainly the county leader, the position of county leader has evolved in many ways over the years. The New York county leader, I think, is probably, in the New York County organization, Democratic organization, I think is one of the more famous organizations such as they are.
Tammany Hall.
Tammany Hall. People will make reference to Tammany Hall and a guy by the name of Boss Tweed. Now, Boss Tweed, William Boss Tweed, I guess in the early 1800s, mid 1800s, was the county leader. He was the boss. I mean, he had a tremendous track record in terms of registering of voters and such, but certainly he died penniless and in jail, but he also had a big building named after him down on Chambers Street, the Tweed Courthouse.
One of your other predecessors, Carmine DeSapio, perhaps the last of the real legendary political bosses. The beginning of the end of his political career was he lost a local district leader fight in Greenwich Village to an upstart newcomer by the name of Ed Koch.
That's right, that's right.
Koch was part of a reform political movement in reaction to political scandals at the time. There have been, I guess, scandals in politics, like scandals in the police department. They seem to come every 20 years or so. People forget the lessons in the past. But every time there have been scandals in the past, in the 70s and the 80s, there was kind of a reform movement, a grassroots movement of people who said, no, we want to do politics in a different way. The last couple of years, there have been quite a few corruption trials involving members of the city council, members of the state legislature. But I don't have the sense that there's the same grassroots reform movement that, I mean, there are clubs that claim that they're reform clubs, but in terms of new people coming in and say, we want to do things in a different way, it feels differently to me than it did in the 80s or in the 70s. Am I right
as
about
the
that?
county leader of New York County, I think we have a county, the whole county, I think, is full of reformers.
Okay.
And if you, listen, my predecessor was a guy named Herman Denny Farrell, who was the county leader for 28 years. And I've said it often, and I'll say it again, I don't plan to be county leader for 28 years, so I'll never break that record. But Denny Farrell did a marvelous job in terms of making sure and keeping us scandal-free. And certainly, you know, I don't look forward to any of that stuff. So we're not, if it ain't broken, we're not going to try and fix it. But the whole island of Manhattan, every political club from Chinatown up to Washington Heights are nothing but reform clubs. So what it is exactly, so the term boss, I think, is a misnomer. It's an absolute misnomer. My job is to make sure that the county Democrats get bigger and stronger, and also to elect judges. I mean, that's what we do. That's essentially what we do. The patronage of the old days is no longer around. Let's be clear. There's no more, you know, make a phone call to the mayor and get 5 people hired for these union jobs. It just does not happen like that anymore. So it's actually a great job because you get to put good people on the bench, and certainly some of the people that won't necessarily be able to go before the mayor's judicial committee, because the mayor is only basically looking at those folks that went to Harvard and Yale. And believe me, I know there are a lot of good people who are definitely suited to serve on the bench that did not go to Harvard and Yale.
We're going to continue our conversation with Assemblymember Keith Wright when CityWide continues right after this.
My name's Reggie. Just recently, my wife and I took in her sister's children. And we already had 4, so I went from becoming a family man to a man with a bigger family. Now, you can't eat love, so I don't know how I'm gonna feed them tonight. How was that, Reg?
I think I look more like Denzel.
That's cold, man.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with Assemblymember Keith Wright. We talked a little bit in the first half about what happened with the reapportionment process itself. I want to talk about the aftermath of reapportionment for a second. So the congressional lines as we speak are not quite settled. The Assembly and Senate lines are, and I don't think that there are going to be too many. There may be some contested elections that come out of that, but not too much. But the congressional lines are, at the moment, are still very much up in the air. And there are a number of incumbents whose careers can be affected by this, including your representative, Charlie Rangel, 81 years old, has gone through some controversy in the last few years and is now facing potentially a significantly different district than he's represented before. So how do you think that this plays out for Charlie, and are there other incumbents where you think that potentially we could see some new faces in Washington?
Well, one of the reasons why I guess we were able to get our state and Senate legislative lines drawn is because that we did not want a special master drawing these lines. Now, you get a special master is a person that I guess is supposed to be fair and judicious and what have you, but they won't draw the lines. Basically try and keep communities of interest together. Now, that being said, I've drawn some maps so that the Charles Rangel, my congressman, has been a congressman for 40 years, would basically be able to have a more African-American district. It is a voting rights district, thus it has to be protected. We have 4 voting rights districts in the city of New York, one represented by Greg Meeks, the other represented by Yvette Clarke, the other represented by Ed Towns, and another represented by Congressman Charles Rangel. So we've drawn some maps that would potentially raise the African-American population up to around 40%. Currently, the district as it stands now only has a 25% African-American population, and the rest Latino with some white. So, and what we've also tried to do is also try and draw a district, another Latino congressional district here in the city of New York. Now, when this program is being taped, just yesterday, we heard that Congressman Gary Ackerman has decided to call it quits. Why did he call it quits? I guess he would have to run in a new area after serving in 30 years in Congress. So people don't necessarily want to meet new people. Right. They like who they represent. I think we will have some congressional races due to the reapportionment of various congressional districts. The other factor that came into being was the Bob Turner seat, who took over for Anthony Weiner. Because during a congressional reapportionment year, the state of New York has to lose 2 congresspeople, and we lost 1 Democrat from upstate New York, a guy named Maurice Hinchey, but Bob Turner didn't want to go. The Republicans didn't want to sacrifice that seat because it was their seat, their 1 congressional seat in the city of New York. However, now Mr. Turner has decided he wants to run against Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. So, with the retirement of Gary Ackerman, I guess it frees up some real estate, although the special master has drawn congressional lines of which the members of Congress are not happy at all. So no one is ever happy because I think the baby has been cut in half.
I want to go back to your reference to the Voting Rights Act for a second, and also the notion of drawing the Rangel district to include more African American population. So it's 2012. Barack Obama is the president of the United States. David Patterson had been the governor of the state, not elected, but the governor of the state. David Dinkins has been the mayor of the city of New York. Are we still in an era in New York City where African American opportunities to run for office depend on having an African American district? In other words, the premise of the Voting Rights Act, the premise of packing a district for Rangel, is that unless you have concentrations of ethnic groups, people who had historically been disenfranchised won't have a fair shot at getting elected. Do you think that's still the case in New York?
Oh, sure. Listen, there are various groups out here. Common Cause, I think, was one of them. Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, Asian American Legal Defense Fund. They came out with some maps saying that we need an Asian district. I mean, when you have emerging communities in various places, especially in the city of New York, there's no reason in the world why those communities should not have representation.
But didn't John Lew's election citywide show that blacks, whites, Latinos would vote for an Asian American? They were a small fraction of the city's population, yet he was able to win a citywide election.
Sure. No, absolutely. John Lew did. He put a coalition together of labor, of various ethnic groups, and racial groups as well. But I think since we've had the Voting Rights Act, it's very important that these districts be protected. And I think that we need those protections now more than ever.
So you're a county leader.
I am.
There are, at the moment, 4 leading Democratic candidates for mayor. Things could change. You know, I've been telling people that at the moment I think Anthony Weiner has an edge over John Lew, but things can change. But if we look at the current field of the main contenders, Two of the candidates are from Manhattan.
Actually, three.
Well, I don't know who you're counting, but
Bill Thompson.
Bill is living in Manhattan.
Bill lives in Manhattan, that's right.
Okay, so you've got
Chris Quinn and Scott Stringer.
Bill de Blasio from Brooklyn. Thompson is African American. All of the other candidates, I think, have close relationships with the African American community, but Thompson is the only African American, the only candidate of color in the race. Handicap the race for me today. I know it's a year away, but handicap the race. How do you think they're doing now? And more importantly, what would you like to hear from each of the candidates before you decide who you're going to recommend to your colleagues?
Well, I think they're all doing incredibly well. They have all been able to raise the money that they need to raise. I know that Bill Thompson ran a fabulous race back in 2009 against a super rich mayor. And if he had gotten a little help, if he had gotten a real endorsement from the President of the United States, he would have been the mayor. He went up against Goliath and just came a little bit short. So Billy Thompson certainly has an edge in that he's been on a ballot citywide. Scott Stringer has been a fabulous borough president. Certainly he has spoken out on issues of importance to a lot of folks, and he's especially when he's speaking out on the stop and frisk issue, which is paramount and important to all communities of color throughout the city of New York. He certainly is doing well in that respect. Christine Quinn has been a great speaker, although she has not been on a ballot citywide. She's only been on a ballot in terms of her various councilmanic district, but she certainly is a household name. John Liu, despite all of the bad publicity concerning the campaign finance stuff, I think he's done some good work in terms of what he's done in the city comptroller's office. So they're all, and Bill de Blasio, certainly. Bill de Blasio, I mean, you can't open up a newspaper without seeing him either talking about bad landlords or something that resonates with just everyday people.
So all of them could have a shot at winning?
They all could have a shot at winning.
And all have a shot at your endorsement?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I have to do what I think is best for the party of New York County, and certainly above and beyond everything else, we have to pick the winner. We have to pick the winner because that will help.
I want to shift gears for a second away from the politics and sort of back into a policy area that I know that you have spent a lot of time thinking about, and that's education in New York, and in particular, sort of, I think that the charter school movement in some ways was a way to get around the bureaucracy because people felt that the bureaucracy was too tough to tackle. And Harlem in particular is a neighborhood where a lot of charter schools have come up to operate. Has that been a positive development? Has it goosed the Department of Education towards being more innovative and responsive, just having some competition? Has it gone too far? Mayoral control, where do you think education policy ought to go?
Well, in 1998, the state legislature voted to enact charter schools. I voted for that legislation. I'm not against charter schools. But certainly we looked at voting for charter schools as if they would be their separate and own entities, separate and distinct entities. We thought that they would have their own edifices throughout the city of New York. Okay, fine, well and good. Then, I guess because of the lack of space in the city of New York, this animal known as co-location started to emerge. Co-location has destroyed neighborhoods.
That's where you put a charter school inside a public school.
Inside a public school. It has created almost like a Dickensian tale of two cities in schools, the haves and the have-nots. I mean, I've been in public schools, and I go into my public schools regularly, and you'll see a charter school with a lovely 5th and 6th floor. You may even see carpeting. You'll see smart boards. You'll see computers, and then you'll see the kids from the public school, the host public school, that have been displaced from that floor down in the basement next to steam pipes, next to the bathroom, next to the utility lockers, what have you. So it has created almost as I said, the haves and have-nots. And then add to the mix, you have a very strident woman by the name of Eva Moskowitz, who has made Harlem her, I guess, her stomping grounds. And I remember that at one point they put a chain on the lock of a school and just and call the police on the parents of the kids in the public school. So co-location has actually torn apart a lot of the neighborhood uptown. Harlem has almost become the epicenter for the charter school movement. And yes, I don't disagree with charter schools, but I'm sure let's see the ones that work and let them work, and rather than, and I'm sure there are other places in the city of New York where they could be used as well. In fact, when they've tried to open charter schools on the Upper West Side, there's been a mass movement, and they've been rejected on more than one occasion. So I've introduced a bill that anytime a school has to be co-located with a charter school, that it has to be voted upon by the Community Education Council rather than just by executive fiat by the mayor of the city of New York.
My thanks to New York State Assembly Member Keith Wright of Harlem. I'm Ken Fisher. Thanks for joining us on this edition of CityWide.